Good morning. So, the Bible has a lot of really great pull-out quotes in it that fit really nicely on cross-stitch hoops or make great bumper stickers, right? And what home decor is complete without some, shabby chic wooden panel that says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." It looks so good among all the family photos and all that. That's just a perfect good little nugget straight from the Bible, right? And then there's the ubiquitous John 3:16 that always makes its way onto sweatshirts and coffee mugs and everything else. And the Beatitudes. Gotta love the Beatitudes because you can, make bullet points of those and have them, I've seen some really great t-shirts and things like that, that kind of show your faith. And, it's a nice quick little way to say, this is what I believe. Well, I've even seen some really good shepherd art out there, but what I've never seen written in an edgy font across the whole rear window of somebody's lifted pickup truck. You never see, "I am the gate." John 10:9. I mean, it's just kind of a weird one, right? And yet it shows up in this morning's reading. Of all of the "I am" statements that Jesus makes, this one's a little harder to pull out and emblazon on a license plate or tack onto a piece of jewelry. It's kind of awkward. I mean, let's think about gates for a moment. What comes to mind? For me, the first thing I envision is the entrance to my husband's grandmother's gated community. She lives in this absolutely gorgeous neighborhood that seems to just kind of pop up in the middle of nowhere. It's in Friant, and you kind of go you're taking, I think it's the 41, and no, it's not the 41. You're taking, what do you take? Whatever. Doesn't matter. You take whatever it is. You take Old Friant Road or whatever. You take whatever. And you got winding road, hill. Oh, there's Friant Dam, hill, and then bam, just kind of in the middle of nowhere, luxury. So you pull into this oasis of fountains and greenery, and it's in the middle of all these yellow grassy hills, and you kind of blink a little bit at the contrast of it all and wonder if you're in the right place or if this even exists at all or if it's really just a mirage because it's 110 degrees outside in the valley. And then there's this little call box, and you have to enter that dreaded code to be able to get in. Do you know what I'm talking about? So it's the code that I know I've saved into my phone 1,000,000 times, and yet every time I go there, I can't find it in my notes. I can't find it in grandma's listing in my phone book. It's not anywhere ever. So then I get desperate and I start rereading every text message I've ever had with anyone in Chris's family. Just kind of hoping that maybe if I scroll back to December when we were there for Christmas, I might find the message where my brother-in-law may have sent it. And aha! There it is. So I'll read it to Chris and he punches it in. And we're all full of triumph only to discover the code has changed. Every time. Or we've, it's an asterisk instead of pound or something like that. And then grandma's not answering her phone, right? So we're just sitting there waiting for someone else to come along and open the gate so we can get in. Gates are frustrating, at least in my experience. And gates are exclusionary, and gates can imprison people against their will. Gates imply an us and them that gets really murky really fast. Gates make for a weird "I am" statement, Jesus. What? And yet here it is, waiting for us to faithfully make out the reason behind it. What's the meaning? This week's reading ends just one verse shy of the more well-known "I am" statement from Jesus, which is, "I am the good shepherd." It just cuts off right before that. So we don't even get to go past the gate. We're just still in that weird place. Luckily, the Revised Common Lectionary does skillfully pair today's reading with Psalm 23, adding a little bit more depth to the Good Shepherd theme, and it aids us along in our understanding of this imagery. Otherwise, we could really be reading it all wrong. And sometimes with the closed to the public nature of gates, we do read it wrong. The good shepherd, minus that actual verse that says I am the good shepherd, but that's a whole other thing. It comes chronologically after Jesus has healed the man who was born blind. And Jesus has been scrutinized by the Pharisees, who have balked at his suggestion that the man's physical malady was not in fact caused by a big bunch of sin on his part, but rather that they, the people who think that they see pretty clearly everything, are the ones who are the sinners. Getting into the nitty-gritty of sin is another sermon for another day. But know that the lead up to this pericope is Jesus saying to the Pharisees, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. And that's John 9:41, if you wanted to back it up and see what that is. It's one way of telling them that the person who is afflicted is not to blame here. But instead, those who are completely sure of the correctness of their vision, 2020 vision, are towing a very dangerous line morally. So this leads us into Jesus speaking in riddles about gates and shepherds. The Pharisees in the previous passage are clearly the self and socially proclaimed gatekeepers to God. Have you ever come into contact with a gatekeeper who is so enamored of their own power that they just really make things harder than they should be? I ran into one last week on the phone with my health insurance company, and the whole conversation was super dismissive of my needs or concerns or the information that I could provide to help us figure this out a little faster. But that aside, taken with the backstory of the Pharisees as gatekeepers, we could assume that John 10:1-10 is about Jesus giving us the authority to be gatekeepers, maybe, right? After all, we're all on the right side of the fence, right? Right? We can say that anyone who hasn't entered the gate the same exact way as us is a bandit and a thief. But, that's what it says in there, right? I mean, it's right there. Except it doesn't. Jesus is a gate which needs no other keeper to demand the password or the secret handshake to pass through. It isn't our job to do that for him. Instead, Jesus is lecturing the Pharisees and those of us who are tempted to be the bouncer at the entrance to check whether someone's name is on the guest list or not, that he's the only one who gets to be the gatekeeper. Jesus is the only one that gets to have that role. The gate is open, and his voice is calling to his flock to come in through the gate, to come to the safety of being cared for within a secure area. One cannot hop the fence and be part of this community of mutual respect and care, because to do so is to claim what does not belong to you. To come in as an authority by way of climbing over the gate instead of walking through will ultimately cause harm, because if one does not enter into relationship with open and honest means, there's a lack of care for anything beyond one's own personal interests. And this is kind of what he's getting at with the Pharisees. There's no need to enter by any other way into this unity of compassion and neighborly love and justice when the gate is being held open wide for those who earnestly seek to live in such a way. You don't have to go by covert means to do this. I mean, the door's open, right? Why would you go in through the window? Why would you break in if the door's wide open? So this is a conversation that Jesus has with leadership to convince them that political power plays and personal gain only get in the way of creating the kind of community and world that God requires us to live in. By arbitrarily assuming sin on a man who was born blind, they're assuming the role of gatekeeper, and instead they'll find that this is not what God intended at all. So how does this hit during COVID tide, which I'm going to give attribution to Reverend Daniel Ross Jones here for that clever title for what we're in here. It's too good not to put to use. But how can we read this ancient chunk of text in a modern light? Right now, leaders all over the world are reacting to and making decisions regarding how long to keep our communities and cities safe under shelter-in-place orders. This is a heavy weight to put on the shoulders of any leader, where lives and the health of our communities are at stake, and while people suffer economically because of it as well. In the meanwhile, rampant misinformation and unchecked facts circulate so quickly on the internet. There are things that sound really right, and we agree with them wholeheartedly because it makes so much sense, but they may not be based in fact. They could just be opinion. And our leadership is tasked with holding all of this in tension and making decisions that will best usher us safely through this epidemic, this pandemic. One way we can apply the lens of the fake gatekeeper to our situation is by asking how the responses look when contrasted with the beloved community. There may be a call to rise up against injustice, but is the call rooted in love for neighbor or love for business interests? There could be talk of unifying and needing to have an all-in-this-together approach, but if together neglects the least and the last, the unhoused, or the elderly, or the chronically ill, or any of the other others that are out there, or, you and me, then justice is neglected. If these areas are notably lacking, then it does not follow the kind of fellowship that God intends for us to be in. The I am the gate story provides a helpful way for us to track how we are holding up our end of the bargain when it comes to being the sheep who are lovingly tended to by a good shepherd on this side of the gate. If what we see does not uphold these things, we can come to our Savior, our shepherd, for guidance and how to speak truth to power and to look past fake gatekeepers of our time while supporting those who are upholding Jesus' shepherding practices and caring for all that are in the flock. Jesus as the shepherd and as the gate helps us to distinguish between God's sovereignty and the authority of elected leadership. And as God's people, we can hold our leaders accountable to stay in line with the just world for all that God imagines for us. The other takeaway is that we are protected while we are in the care of our shepherd. Psalm 23 lets us know that with the Lord as our shepherd, we are not left on our own. We are not condemned to wander across hill and dale without purpose. We are not left to the harsh elements around us. When one of the flock becomes ill or sprains a hoof, the shepherd carries them to a safe place. And while we are safely inside the gate, we are connected to God in a way that will never leave us alone as we heal from whatever ails us. We are reminded that as long as we trust in God and follow the voice of our shepherd, we are given abundant life in a safe pasture. This sheep enclosure is not exclusive. Jesus makes no claims about separating the good sheep from the bad sheep when it comes, to maybe that one sheep that headbutts the other sheep when it gets bored, or the one who obnoxiously bleats all night long where everybody is asleep. We are all assumed to be in this relationship with the Good Shepherd, given safety and security through our relationship with him. And in a time when we are asked to wear masks to Save Mart and to go without the in-person physical comfort of one another, being cared for and protected by a loving shepherd and by, yes, a gate, is the good news that we could really use right now. May we all be held in the loving care of our shepherd, now and always.